we normalise stress, the stressful phone call, the stressful email. We can be doing better here. You can put practices within your day to remain calm in the stressor, and you can just see a complete shift in that state, or you can choose not to and feel overwhelmed.
Tony, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me back, man.
You got the new book out, which is super exciting. And I went for a walk this morning and I was thinking about your work and the kind of messages you put out to the world, which I think are very, very necessary. And I really like that quote that you have, which is, we can't all live in nature, but we can all live naturally. I think it's really, really powerful. I thought to start with, we could really unpick what that means. And maybe the best lens to do that through is, I don't know, you see a lot of clients, a lot of people come to your retreats. What is the typical morning, would you say, of Joe Public today compared to, let's say, the typical morning of a hunter-gatherer in Africa?
Doesn't even have to be the hunter-gatherer in Africa, you know, it can just be someone that's aligning their physiological, kind of social, spiritual needs, right? Within any habitat. I think that's the idea of this. We can't all live in nature, but it doesn't mean we can't live naturally. The last retreat I held, the very first morning I went through this, we covered kind of what were people's morning rituals, what was their morning experience, and it was in a yurt, so all in one big yurt, sitting in a circle. And there were some there that were already on the path. So there was tongue scraping and, you know, cold immersion and breath work. But then my conversation, even with that, was, well, what does it feel like if you don't do those practices? You know, because what can happen is we can also get so attached to these practices. Oh my God, if I don't do that, what happens? And again, is that living naturally within any environment to become stressed if we miss something out? I think so. I was addressing that on the last retreat. But if we unpacked kind of even a nighttime ritual or a morning ritual, even looked at a landscape. So if we stripped away everything right now, you know, the lighting, the furniture, the noise, the sounds, the sound pollution, the noise pollution, the air pollution, and just stripped it right back and just think what that might look like and what we might be ingesting through all our senses, because it's about our senses being open visually, what we can smell, what we can taste, what we can hear, what we can feel through everything we're doing, right? There's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You know, it's a great template in looking at your most basic fundamental needs at the bottom of the pyramid, right? And we could put food in there. So food being one of those very basic needs. And I held a retreat recently and there was a foraging expert there, Tasha, brilliant foraging expert. We had this conversation of how I would like to take things with foraging, and it would be very much about senses and feeling and smelling and tasting the foods that they were picking. And if we looked at that versus what could be, it's the rush hour, right? And I'm maybe a bit late. I've skipped breakfast, so I'm gonna run into one of the coffee shops. I'm going to grab a croissant and a coffee, and I'm going to smash it back on my walk. But it's not really a walk, it's like a speed walk. So it's not like I'm down-regulating, foraging and walking with my senses open. I'm really up-regulated, which probably means that my digestive system isn't really activated to receiving or absorbing. And then we could say, well, out of that Maslow's hierarchy of needs at the food pyramid, which one is getting their food need met? So it's even down to that, looking at, well, if that's where it is in nature and this is where we're at, how can I look at getting my needs met in my everyday environments, and just understanding, well, that this is the natural template, that's how it looks. And that's the premise of the book, really. It's just this idea of giving people an understanding that this is how it looks in nature and this is where we're at. And it's not demonizing where we are in the city. It's just understanding that, well, actually, we can be doing better here. There is perhaps space to get our needs met if we just looked at the environment differently.
I think that's a powerful example. And it makes me think of this idea that so much of what we do in life, or the way we think about life and we think about health and wellness, is about what? You know, what should we be eating? What movement should I do, for example? But we don't really think about as much, you know, how should we be doing this? Or how might we want to do this? And what you just said there about the digestive system is something I'm incredibly passionate about, that you can sit there, you know, rushed stressed out of your mind, trying to fire off a few emails at the time with your beautiful whole food organic lunch, but you're probably not going to digest it as well. Well, not probably, you are not going to digest it or extract enough nutrients or the same amount of nutrients if you had, in your words, down-regulated first, right? And you've used this term, down-regulation, up-regulation. What does that mean?
Upregulation is, we could call it fight, flight, freeze. So if the lion enters the room right now, roars at us, we will make a decision based on that. We're either, I imagine we're freeze, and assist the lion's digestion at that point. But that's the fight and flight response. And then through that, to simplify it, what can happen is the immune system, there's no point in fighting off a cold, right? So the immune system drops off. I need that energy elsewhere. Digestive system is a huge cost for digestion, so I'll drop that one off because I need the energy again, perhaps to fight or run away. And then reproductive system's another one, right? No point in me producing another Bam Bam in the world if I'm going to be eaten by a lion, right? So those are very costly systems. So those will be dropped off to fuel my system to enable me to fight or flight, right? And then down regulation is this rest and digest. So a rested system, more associated with parasympathetic, that calm response where those systems are almost like rebooted in a way. And that should, if you think about it, should be our normal growth state where we are down regulated. And that's and then an acute response would be this sympathetic fight flight as the lion enters, because the lion wouldn't always be in the room with us, right? Unfortunately, our lifestyles today, there's an imaginary lion in the room, right? It's there, and that for some is even an email or a phone call. And they're almost like bolt-ons, aren't they? It could be a late night. It could be a late night, then a phone call. It could be, I've got to go into a meeting. I'm a bit upregulated about the meeting. And then other stuff might be playing out from way back there that we haven't processed even. So the down-regulation within the book, I'm bringing those practices in so we can find ways of getting perhaps that rest and digest, that crystal clear state of mind, that growth-promoting mindset back. And that's before going into things like digestion, into sleep. I work with ice baths and offer cold immersion part of experiences, but the application of that isn't to go and do another ice bath. How many ice baths are people going to go and do post retreat? Some, take it on. They might be doing them every morning even, but others it's just a rite of passage. And what they take away from it is that the ice bath is now the stressful phone call, the stressful email. One person I worked with had a terrible relationship with her father, and would have to go and see him certain times of the year, but was so stressed about it. And I just said, okay, stop outside the house, work on the down regulation breathing techniques. Let's do the long exhales. The longer the exhale, the lower the heart rate, blood pressure. Let's try 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out. 6 rounds of that, you're already at a minute. That's a minute. Just take a minute. Okay, let's do 2 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever it takes. Get to the door. As you answer the door, you breathe out. As you enter the house, you breathe out, and you maintain that same rhythm of breath by nasal breathing. No one in the room knows you're nasal breathing or following a 4-6, but you're keeping down regulated. And she messaged back immediately afterwards and just said, oh my God, I just saw the experience as something completely different. Because her past emotions weren't playing out in that room from being upregulated. It's just like simple down-regulation practice changed her experience with her father, right? Yeah,
I think this is so powerful, Tony, because I think a lot of us don't realise that our daily experience of life is hugely influenced by the state of our nervous system, right? And if you are constantly, upregulated, so your stress, your fight or flight system effectively is on a lot of the time, you're going to see things differently. You're going to be reactive. You're going to see danger when there is actual no physical danger, but you are going to see it and perceive it. And just understanding that when you downregulate, when you do, as you say, 1 or 2 minutes of a simple breathing practice.
So simple, right?
You just experience the same situation completely differently. You're probably not going to get as triggered. You're probably going to make better decisions, all kinds of things. And, I want to talk in this conversation about a lot of daily practices that people can do, because I think you have so many to share. And before we do that, though, I kind of feel I want to pause at this point to do with stress and upregulation and downregulation. You have spent a lot of time studying, I know, indigenous tribes. How do people live in natural environments? And then how can we bring some elements of that to the modern world? As a doctor, I know that around 90% of what we see in any given day is in some way related to stress. And I just don't think people really get stress still and understand how stressed and how upregulated they are much of the time. In your experience, people who come to your retreats, people who seek you out for help, people you've coached, when they come and see you, what proportion of their daily life do you think they're spending upregulated compared to downregulated, compared to, let's say, an indigenous tribe who are living in nature with nature? Can you sort of paint a picture for us of what that difference might look like?
I can paint it from Bruce. So Bruce Parry has been with so many tribes now, documentary tribes, also TY. And I had a good chat with Bruce around the book as well, discussing Penin tribe and another tribe called the Benjeli tribes. They're mentioned in the book.
They are. I love that bit with the Penin tribe. I just underlined it. I thought it was wonderful.
Amazing story. And he just expressed this. He just said, look, you'll get it, Tony, because of this right and left hemispheres and being down-regulated and this state of meditation they're operating in like 24/7. It's like, even if they're in alert states, it's like an alert state that we would talk through the Wim Hof method, let's say, where you're using an upregulating breath technique, but not to bring that kind of upregulation stress, to become an alert state. So there's a positive to that. It might be, I'm having a slump in the afternoon. Say we're having a slump in the afternoon, it's 3:30, I've got to jump on a podcast. I'll use another type of breath practice to just pick me up again. It just brings me up into an alert state. It doesn't mean I'm stressed out, but it's an alert, tuned in practice.
So like a stressed and focused,
yes,
as opposed to a stressed and anxious.
Yes, it's a different mindset. So that's what Bruce was explaining, that these indigenous tribes, that again, they're moving through a landscape, but they're not separate to it. They're totally tuned into the frequency of it, right? That's where they're at. And if we look at people that maybe turn up on retreat, they've normalized stress. It's like that's what they operate at the whole time. So it's like these indigenous communities that Bruce is talking about are normalizing downregulation, parasympathetic, and some of the attendees I see have normalized sympathetic. And what we then do is things like ice baths or breathing techniques enables us to go up, we get a peak, and then they can drop back under again. So suddenly it's like, there's a stressor. Because I've just been operating at stress, I almost need even more of a peak of stress to be able to drop back under again, to recognize where my parasympathetic, my more crystal clear state of mind would be. Mm-hmm. And I see it just from taking people, again, like with the blindfolds on into the forest, you can just see a complete shift in that person's state. You can feel it. It's not just seeing it, you just feel it from like their whole aura. There's something changes within their energy.
I guess people know that, don't they? Most people will probably recognize the feeling, I guess, on a Sunday maybe, when they haven't got to go to work and they haven't got anything like to do, or even on holiday, how just they feel, and maybe a few aches and pains aren't there. Just there's a relaxedness, and your experience of the world is very different when you're in that state. And I guess many people think, though, I can only be in that state when I'm on holiday or on a Sunday, right? Many people will listen and go, yeah, that's all right for you maybe. Yeah. But I've got a busy life. I've got a busy job. It doesn't apply to me. What would you say to them?
I have a coaching business. I hold retreats. I've just produced a book in lockdown, which is hats off to anyone that's produced anything in lockdown, I believe. And did 2 major endurance events, built a documentary around that. We unschool our kids as well, so we've been doing that for many years. and still manage to operate in a down-regulated state. So there is this, oh, it's okay for you, mate, but I'm totally there with you. You know, I live it as well. I live that environment. It just, you can put practices within your day. You just need little reminders, and sometimes that's all it takes. It's a reminder to breathe. You know, it's a reminder maybe on the hour to say, everyone has a minute, you know, out of your hour. Take one of the minutes away and just say, okay, here's 6 cycles of breath, just to reconnect to the breath again and to find myself within it.
So let's just talk people through that, because a lot of people have heard of breath work, they've heard of practices, they've heard it on this show before, but you mentioned one, the 4-6,
Yeah.
right? So maybe just be super practical with people. On the hour, you're recommending that they take a pause and do 4-6?
4-6, 6 cycles. And sometimes, you know what, don't even get obsessed by the counting of it. You know, there's a breathing app I've recommended in the past, and it has a sound that picks up for 4 seconds, another sound that drops off for 6 seconds. That's called breathing app. It's so simple, right? That's one. Or it can just be, if you put your finger on your pulse for a moment and you just inhale up through your nose, you'll notice there's a slight pickup of the pulse. As you exhale and you exhale for longer, you'll notice there's a dropping off of the pulse. So it's as long as you can inhale for and as long as you can exhale for, but to try and extend the exhale a little longer and practice 6 cycles. You'll be at around a minute, right? Prior to that, just try this. Wherever you're sitting, it could be on the floor, office chair, wherever you are, just try and relax the pelvic basin in your lower abdomen, because we're also very tense down there, right? So we're walking around very tense. So try and relax that area to begin with. Allow your jaw to settle and your heart to settle. Just tune into that very simple language. Relax the pelvic floor, the pelvic basin, the lower abdomen, the jaw, let the shoulders go and let the heart go. Even that, if you just even think of that, you're already a step there. Like immediately the moment I think of that, I'm like, oh, okay, I feel calm again.
Yeah.
You know, it just comes in, drops in. And then you breathe into that space. Breathe into the relaxed jaw, breathe into the relaxed shoulders, breathe into the lower abdomen, the pelvic floor, and just allow all that being of you just to expand on the inhale. And then don't push your exhale. So you just allow your exhale to go as if,
Yeah.
Otherwise it turns into, and then we're tense again in the lower abdomen, the jaw, and the shoulders. So it's just allowing your whole being to be inflated with an inhale and allow the breath just to leave you. And that's 6 cycles. That's such a simple practice.
It's so simple, isn't it? So like an alarm on the hour, maybe on people's phones to remind them, like even if they're stuck.
Post-it note, boom, up on your screen, whatever it is. Just remember to breathe today. You know, it could be, it's just little reminders. And we do need the reminders because again, once that stuff starts kicking in, the next email, the next phone call, and we find ourselves upregulated, we're already operating from a different system. So sometimes we just need that little reminder, like a little tap on the shoulder from your favorite uncle or aunt saying, just remember to breathe now.
Yeah. I mean, what I love about that practice is that there's literally nobody who is listening to this podcast right now who couldn't do that. It doesn't cost any money, right? They don't have to buy anything. They don't need to get an app, really. You know, you don't even really need to time it, do you? It's just a rough approximation, you know, roughly in for 4, out for 6, and just do that for a minute. And what benefits is someone going to get if they do that? Why should they?
I honestly believe that just those simple practices, like the inner work, I call it, but every relationship improves from you doing the inner work, including the one with yourself, right? So that will mean that every relationship within your work environment, a home environment, will improve via that. It could be like with the lady I'm discussing who enters her father's home, her relationship with her father improves from that, right? Just in that moment. Because again, she's seeing him differently. She's not seeing him from what might have been way back there in childhood even, because she's not operating at that subconscious layer. It's now she's entered as a conscious adult into that experience, not operating as maybe the 6-year-old or the 5-year-old back there, right?
Yeah.
I guess your ability to think clearly, precisely, you know, so within a work environment, what do we want? We want to be on our game, don't we? You know, we want to be able to articulate. We want to be focused. We want to be able to deliver on time or targets, and you can do all of that.
You're going to work better.
You just work more efficiently, right?
Yeah.
That's it in its simple form. But again, I think it's really down to, for me, it's the relationships. Every relationship improves, and with parenting, for instance, it might even be working from home. I have a studio outside the house. I have this really long commute these days across the lawn, right? But it's sometimes easy to forget that that's still a work environment.
Yeah.
And I'd suddenly enter the home and I'm still in the email or the phone call. So what can we do? Okay, we put everything down in that moment, breath work, just for a moment, a minute, then leave that experience and leave whatever it is in that space before entering the new space. Because again, the kids are waiting for you. They're waiting to see you. And who do they want to see? They want to see kind of, again, the upregulated papa or the downregulated papa, you know, who have they been waiting for? And believe me, like an hour or 2 hours is like a lifetime to kids if you've been in that environment.
It could be, I just can do 1 minute of down regulation breathing where my out breath is longer than my in breath in my car. And then when you walk through the door, your interaction with your partner, with your kids, it's going to be completely different. It can stop a lot of, unnecessary disputes or arguments.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing for me, Tony, is I hear that. Why I think that's such a powerful practice also is because we get to work and we just start to accumulate a lot of the time stress and what I call micro stress doses. And if you don't do anything to down regulate, you just keep going, keep going. And then by the end of the day, when you've finished, you may not have done anything to pause, to bring everything back down again. So by the time you then rock up at home after work, whether you're working from home or from an office, your state is completely different and arguably not the best state to then interact with loved ones.
I had this moment. I was staying at my friend's space in Somerset. We were there for 6 months, so we got to live in like a proper community experience. And there was one morning, I had a lot on, and I just thought, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to the lake. I'm just going to sit at the lake. So I walked to the lake, did some breath, and in that moment, it was this simple language of, it's a choice, right? So you can choose to do the breath and appreciate the privilege, or you can choose not to and feel overwhelmed. And then I realized it was just a fine line between overwhelm and privilege. And what can help me navigate that path is just a simple breathing practice. But equally, being out in nature, just as we're discussing breath, just a walk within a green space or taking your shoes off and going for a walk on the lawn, the study suggests that 20 minutes in a natural environment will lower heart rate, blood pressure, and drop us into parasympathetic as well. What equally it has to highlight, though, a bit like the morning practice, is, that why are we upregulated? What is it within this everyday environment that's doing this? And what are the other things I could be addressing, right? That could be, again, getting out to green space might be one, spending more time outdoors. We're known as this indoor species, right? This urbanite species that spends 90-95% of our time indoors. So we can look at stretching, perhaps try and find more time outside, or from that natural experience of being outside and recognizing that just a small percentage of time outdoors will lower heart rate and blood pressure. What can I learn from that? Can I perhaps journal what that experience is and what it is I'm feeling? What are those things that I feel drawn to that are lowering the heart rate and blood pressure? And what can I bring into my everyday environment from that? What can I learn from this out here to bring into the everyday environment? Because for some, again, it's all right for you, Tony, you might get to spend more time outside, which I get. Others, it's not so simple. They maybe can't get out today or can't get out tomorrow. What if, it's dark immediately afterwards, And outdoors doesn't mean the tube, the car, or the shopping centre. It means actually outdoors, right? And so...
where the sky's above your head.
Yeah, so, what can I be doing? Maybe try and stretch it, make the next tube stop to walk to, or... just try and work with that, but ultimately try and bring more of that organic experience inside the home, in those everyday environments. That might be what you see and what you taste and what you smell and what you feel within those environments, but it's also how we move in those environments. How can we move more organically within an environment, right? Including the home.
Yeah, it's, getting off the tube one stop earlier. Often the narrative, I think, in society around health is, okay, well, you can get more movement in then. Let's say you can get a 20-minute walk in now. Great. And then people naturally often go to, I'm ticking off my physical activity box. How many calories is that going to burn? Or whatever it might be. But again, it's very reductionist, isn't it? Because that 20-minute walk could be many things. It could be you're getting natural light exposure. You might be getting a bit of sun. You might be hearing the birds, depending on where you're walking. You could be doing some breathing at the same time. it's not just one thing, is it? That 20-minute walk actually can hit multiple parameters.
Yeah, you can get many needs met, right? Rather than just the want or the desire to get to work on time, you could flip it and just think, well, okay, what can I receive from that experience? How many of those boxes, those natural needs can I tick off? It can be then, I feel so amazing for just doing a 20-minute walk. I tell you what, I'm going to get up a bit earlier now and maybe walk for a bit longer, and that's what can happen through these experiences and become more of an opportunist even along the way, right? Once you really open things up, what does it feel like? Maybe I'm going to balance on the curbstone today and get some balancing in, or I'm going to balance on the wall, or, use the stairs down to the tube instead of escalator, and just add more things on. Like Yehudi, I describe in the book. Yehudi's he's 82 now. I think I discussed him on the last podcast, but his commute, right, was that he'd wake up in the morning. Anyway, he'd have his whole practice at home. And so he'd have an office experience at home where he'd set it up. There were mats there, so he had no chair. He'd ground sit. He'd answer his emails either on the ground or standing. He'd have a pull-up bar so he could hang from before entering the office. It was in one of those positions where it's always there, so he knew he would do it. Kitchens are great for that, right? You can pull up bar in the kitchen so whenever you enter, I can hang while the kettle's boiling. And then he'd walk in his Vivo barefoot shoes, right? So he's getting his feedback from his feet, and his feet can behave how they're meant to behave. Get to the tube, people would normally say, would you like a seat? And he went, no, I'm okay. And as soon as the tray starts moving, he's either hanging off the rail above, right? So he's hanging while the train's moving, or he's surfing, right? So surfing would mean not holding on to anything and just working so the tube becomes like a huge power plate, right? Where you have to stabilize, great for the hips. And that would be his experience. And then he'd walk up the stairs. And this, it's just, that's where you can take it. And that started happening for him when he was 78 and he's now 82, and he's thriving in terms of his capacity to move now, right?
I mean, that is... It's such a powerful story. It's empowering for anyone who thinks, is it too late? Have I lost a lot of my natural movement? What can I do? When did he start seeing you? Did you say 70?
No, he actually started seeing me. This is a big journey. He first started seeing me when he was 72, and he wanted to learn how to walk. So he was...
And why did he want to learn how to walk? Did he feel, I can't walk properly anymore?
Well, this is a massive story to unpack, but he had a stooped posture, like really head chasing, collapsed in the chest from sitting. I didn't realise this at the time, but anyway, he wanted to learn to walk, so I said, okay, let's pop you up on the treadmill and I'll record you, because unless someone shows you a video of you walking, you really have no idea. You're kind of subconsciously incompetent at that stage, and what the video will do is just make you consciously incompetent, and then we can do some practices and then readdress it, and then and then record it again a bit later, and then suddenly that becomes your new template, your new subconscious competence, let's say, through that model. Introduce him to ground sitting, Vivo, as I mentioned. So those studies are profound, aren't they? That we know that 60% of foot strength, notice it's Professor Dort, I think his name is, from the University of Liverpool, right? Within 6 months of wearing Vivo barefoot shoes, people's foot strength had developed by 60%, right? Yeah. But also balance had increased by 40%.
And I just want to, because I love that study, and I'm a huge fan of Vivo barefoot shoes. They're the ones I wear, my wife, my kids. I'm either barefoot or in Vivos, probably very much like you. And that study, what I love about it is it wasn't about running.
No.
A lot of people hear barefoot shoes and they think, I've got to be able to run.
Immediately.
It's like, hold on, this is just living in barefoot shoes, going to the shops, walking around.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Within a 6-month period. So if you think about that from a parenting perspective, what that means as a parent, okay, and we all want the best for our kids, and we want to create these solid foundations for our kids and foundations for life, right? It's saying that if you wear compromising footwear, you're going to remove 60% your foot strength and 40% your balance. Essentially, that's what it's saying, right? It's also saying that after billions of pounds that's been spent in the sports science world for developing footwear, which is mainly for aesthetics and not athleticism, let's say, if we can understand this model, is where has that got us? But equally, I think for this parental thing, it's like understanding, well, think about the potential that's perhaps lost, right? And if we look at things like physical education, we already know that if you're the youngest in the class, there's a you're at a disadvantage for the older kids when it comes to physical education and PE, right? So there's already this feeling of inadequacy when it comes to sports, perhaps, and PE in later life. But then we're saying we're removing also 60% of foot strength and 40% of balance, But with Yehudi's case, so introduce him to Vivo. So again, foot strength would improve, balance would improve, of course.
Naturally, without working on it, just by actually not compromising your footwear and being in touch with the grounds.
So that's operating at the cause level, right? And really understanding that, because you can do all the foot practices you like, strengthening your feet, balancing work, but if you keep putting them in the same environment that compromised them in the first place, it's merely symptom relief, and quick fixes are further distractions from the truth. You need to get into the real cause, and often it's simply the shape of the foot. It's the environment really that we need to work at, and the environment for the foot in modern society is the shoe, is it not, right? So with Yehudi, that foot strength had improved, balance had improved. His overall understanding of his posture had improved because it removed the chair and got him back to mobilizing areas that are designed to be mobile and creating stability in areas that are essentially designed for stability, and also bringing the squat back, so squatting instead of sitting, so that his mind could understand where his weight should be when he stands up even, let alone when he walks, right? But later on, as time's passed, Yehudi then said, well, the reason I wanted to learn to walk was because I wanted to go to Everest Base Camp for my 50th anniversary with my wife. So that's why he'd taken on that challenge. Mm-hmm. Did Everest Base Camp, did Mount Kenya, Bhutan, Atlas.
In his late 70s?
In his late 70s. This is closer to 80. And then at 79, he came on a workshop of mine, which was originally... it's now called the 100 Human Experience, but originally it was called Move, Breathe, Chill, which was movement and play and breath work and then ice baths. And Yehudi was terrified, right? Properly terrified of the cold. So it took me about an hour the night before the workshop. I mean, he'd agreed to it days before, but an hour the night before to convince Yehudi to come the next morning. Yehudi also lived the closest to the workshop. It was in Camden. He lived in Hampstead. People travelling from all over. And he was still managed to be late, right? But once we got him through the breath work and the play is great for that because it enters this playful state of mind and it breaks down all the armor in a way, and we become much more open, and we become much more open to the breath. So the breath goes right in very quickly. And he was first in the ice bath, right? First one in, and he let out this huge primal roar. I mean, like screaming from the belly was coming out of this man. Then stepped out, and he thought it was done. I said, no, we're going to go back in again. I think we need to go back in, and got him in again. And then since then, Yehudi has been going to either Hampstead Ponds or the River Lee 5 mornings a week for 2 years now, right?
So he's 82, so like 80
Again,
to 82.
Like the practices, like and we think, oh, it's too late for me, or it's too late for them. I can't start this now. I'm already. We're talking about someone in their late 70s. He's not alone. I mean, there's a number of my clients that are past their 70s, mid-70s pluses that have been told, not to take their knees past their toes, and they're now in deep range squats, low gait walking, balancing on rails. And for me, again, it's incredibly inspiring.
Yeah.
Because it changes my template even of what the 70s and 80s are, right? Because my personal understanding of 70s, 80s are looking at my grandparents or even 50 pluses at one point, where it was just normal to groan as you sit back in the chair or something, or groan to get out of the chair. And here we are witnessing empowered 70 to 80-year-olds doing quite profound things. But are they that profound, or are they, again, naturally normal, just... We've become distanced from the path, perhaps.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm so on board. I can't shake this idea of an 82-year-old chap on the tube in London in between stops, hanging from the rail or squatting.
Yeah,
I think it's wonderful, and I think that for me brings up some interesting points. Just taking a quick break to give a shout out to Vivo Barefoot Shoes. Now, I've been recommending these shoes to patients, to friends, to my family for nearly 10 years now. They transform my own life and that of many of my friends, my family, and many of my patients. Vivo Barefoot make minimalist shoes, and I've seen all kinds of improvements when people start to live their lives more often wearing these shoes. It's not about running in them necessarily, but just working in them, walking to the shops in them, walking around the block in them. I've seen people improve their back pain, hip pain, knee pain, things like plantar fasciitis, and people generally have an increased enjoyment of movement when wearing minimalist shoes like Vivos. All you have to do is click on the link below. Now, back to the show. Monday night, I was in Edinburgh, last night of my book tour. And I was coming back on the train yesterday. And the train got cancelled, and there was all kinds of, I had to take 3 trains instead of 1 train. It was all unplanned. And yeah, I was pretty chilled about it, actually, which is, when you practice these sort of things, I feel you naturally, I feel I'm a lot more down-regulated these days naturally, and therefore I just be a lot more. And I'm like, train's cancelled. Okay, cool. Well, it's going to be what it's going to be. And then in the final leg, I thought, actually, Tony's coming tomorrow. Let me get back into his book a little bit more. I'd been reading it over the weekends, and I was reading about Yehudi. And this was a busy kind of local train. It was coming up to office time. A lot of people, there was no chairs and stuff. And I thought, yeah, Tony's coming tomorrow. I'm going to squat. And so for the last hour, in between the, sitting carriages, I was squatting against the wall and just reading your book and then listening to some music or whatever. I was rested against the wall, and after about 10 minutes, I was a bit stiff, so I'd stand up for 2 or 3 minutes, and then I popped back down again. Yeah. The thing is, a lot of people will think, "Oh my God, what will people think? People are going to stare at me." I don't recall anyone looking at me. Like, genuinely, like, people are so tied up in their own worlds and their own podcasts and their own music and their own books. I think that's empowering, that actually no one gave 2 hoots.
I always go with, it's none of my business what other people think of me, right? And also, you'll be surprised that if people are looking at you, how do you know that they're just not being inspired by you? Why do we immediately go to the negative of, they're going to think I'm this crazy man on the tube? They might be inspired, and again, I'm inspired by someone like Yehudi who's be hanging off the tube rails and squatting. How could you not be inspired by that? You're not going to look at someone in their 80s and go, that crazy 80-year-old hanging off the rails and squatting.
You're going to think legend.
Yeah, exactly. And there's that. And I think also it's a cultural thing. Like, our kids are now going to this forest school. It's a group of parents that live where we live, and we kind of done something together and created something for them to attend on a Thursday. And one of the dads was there, and he'd listened to our podcast way back and said, "Oh, no way. You're Katerina and Tony," and was talking about ground sitting.
Oh, fantastic.
And again, was discussing this, how do people react to it? And Katerina said, well, it depends where you are in the world, because some cultures, that's what they do. It's just our where we are in the West, perhaps, it's our own lens of how we see it,
Yeah. Has anyone ever said anything to you negative?
Not negative. I've never had anything negative.
There you go.
Even walking around, and being better. I mean, sometimes, I have had kids kind of be like, well, Papa, why is that man running around with no shoes on? But nothing really, not really negative. Sometimes some strange kind of looks of what's he doing over there. But then again, it's how it's received, right? Mm-hmm. Again, what if we're receiving that upregulated versus receiving it downregulated? How about try and do the practices but work on your breath while you're there? And it might change the lens of which you're receiving that look. It might be suddenly that's a positivity look rather than a negativity look, a judgmental look. And when it comes to judgment, more often than not, we're judging others for judging us, not them judging us.
Yeah.
It's...
when you are concerned or overly concerned with what other people think, usually, if not always, it comes from a place of insecurity, doesn't it? When you don't think enough of yourself. For me, as a fellow barefoot shoe wearer and someone who literally has his shoes off as much as I possibly can, it's really interesting. A lot of people who listen to this podcast now wear Vivos, because Vivo have been supporting the show for a few years, and I talk very passionately about them. And what's really interesting for me, at the event in Edinburgh on Monday night, a lot of the time in the book signing queues afterwards, people show me their Vivos. Like, hey, look, I'm wearing it. It's really nice. And they're like, oh man, I don't have my back pain anymore. I don't have my knee pain. Thank you so much. All this stuff.
Brilliant, right?
There was 2 really lovely women at one point who said, they've just got to make better looking female shoes, then I'll wear them. And first of all, this is something I had with my own wife a few years ago. She's like, but she's been wearing them probably 4 or 5 years now and wouldn't go back, once you experience them. And I think they do look really good now, actually. I think compared to maybe 10 or 15 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
But I think this is a really interesting point. Like, if you look at the research on minimalist shoes, you've mentioned, one of those studies from the University of Liverpool. I think it's Professor Irene Davis in America talks about as soon as you put a human in a cushioned shoe, their gait changes straight away, right? You denormalize, or you changing how you walk.
It's come through animal studies as well. They show it.
Yeah, and then you think, I think, once you know that, and I want to talk to you about feet in just a second, and they're so important to every aspect of who we are. For me, through the lens with which I look at the world, which is, why on earth would I wear cushions every day if I know what that's doing to me? But I understand, and many people, they're persuaded, they give it a go, and they're like, oh man, I'm actually enjoying walking more now because I can feel the ground a lot more. And then they're not quite as disconnected. But some people are still very much off the view, but they don't look normal. They don't have that kind of pointed end that I'm used to. And I guess what I'm trying to get to be as inclusive as possible. I think everyone should try at some point minimalist shoes, Viva or whatever brand you want, right? Try and just see it for yourself how you feel. Have you had resistance to that? Have you had clients who come in and go, look, I'll do the other stuff. Man, that's not my thing. Or does it almost self-select when people want to work with you that they're already in tune with that way of thinking?
Yeah, I have much more compassion these days, like in my coaching. When I first started out on this journey, I used to be quite strict. It used to be, if you're not prepared to change shoes, then I can't really coach you, because the whole point is that, if we understand the behavior of the foot, 33 articulations, 26 bones, 100 muscles, tendons, and ligaments, and all the receptors within the feet, 200,000 extra receptors, and how that feeds and nourishes the whole posture, and all the joint actions above it and the muscular actions above it are in tune with that, then you'll be super efficient and minimize the risk of injury. If you're not prepared to do it, then we're really just offering symptom relief. I'm happy to give you symptom relief, but really this is where it's at. And I think over time, it's just, here's the conversation, this is it, and allow it to just settle a bit, plant the seeds at least, And the beauty of this work now is we do have those studies there. Not many people have heard of that study. And for me, it's quite profound to understand that 60% of your foot strength will improve over a 6-month period. That can be, okay, if you're not prepared to change it, and I get it. Even my Lola and Millie and Tallulah have started putting Lego blocks in the back of their socks to be like high heels, right? And they're unschooled. It's not like they're even in a school environment. Katerina doesn't wear heels. It's just within it. They're observing it somewhere. And am I going to say, no, take those blocks out of your heels? And no, of course I'm not. It's just an experience. They're playing with something. But it's also understanding that probably a large proportion of the day they are barefoot or they're in vivo barefoot. So what can you do? Okay. Could be an unavoidable sitting scenario like now, right? We're sitting, right? Do we alienate sitting, or it's the devil's work sitting? Sitting's the new smoking. There are unavoidable sitting scenarios. You drive a car, get a flight. In an office environment, it's not appropriate to sit on the floor. And for some environments, they won't even allow a standing desk. So what do we do? It's what we do outside of that. The places where we can possibly take responsibility or control of what we can take control of. So when you arrive home and you're behind the door, then get the shoes off. And then there's certain toe practices, or what we call toga or yoga for your feet, that you can then do, which will then help unravel or deconstruct some of that that environment that you've created, which unfortunately does compromise the foot and the behaviors above it, But
it's amazing how much the environment influences our behavior, doesn't it? Not only the environment we see around us and what we think is normal, or typical, I should say, rather than, because you obviously talk a lot about this concept of biologically normal.
Yeah.
But culturally, we may have touched on this when you came on the show a few years ago, but in most Indian families, you take your shoes off before you come in. That's obviously my cultural upbringing, which a lot of people, certainly in the UK and America, don't have it, it can be very different, right? And so have you found there's a difference? Do you get clients from different cultures, different parts of the world, and have you found that actually their willingness to
how they respond,
engage is different depending on their belief system?
Yeah, it's an interesting one with footwear in the home, isn't it? You know, and some haven't actually taken their footwear off. It could be a whole day experience. So even that, as I say, it's suddenly changing that template that within the home, let's just at least try and get that barefoot environment.
Yeah.
Flip the perception of that one environment. And yes, some people are much more responsive to others. It's what's normalized. It's whatever those templates are and how long you've had that experience or what you've observed in your earliest years even play out within that.
Yeah. I mean, there's even... you said office environment where you can't do that much. We thought long and hard, in this new studio, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to sit here maybe for 2 hours with someone having a deep conversation. I don't want them to feel uncomfortable. I don't want to feel uncomfortable myself. Yet there's also a certain expectation of what should a chair be in a studio where someone's coming, right?
Yeah.
And so I have this MoveMan here. I don't know if you know MoveMan, but it's awesome because it's an unstable seat.
Yeah.
So I have to, by default, for this hour, 2 hours, my
move,
postural
man.
muscles. Yeah, I think it's MoveMan.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You'll have to move, man.
I have to move, and this is, I think, a lot about movement. I'd love your perspective on this, but the fact that I can't slump and stop engaging my muscles. Yes, it means that whenever I finish, I've never had an ache. Never. I just simply walk. It's like, I feel great because my muscles have been engaging the entire time. But I also think that this helps me think more clearly throughout the conversation. So I'm not, if I'm stagnating into a chair, my lymph, my blood, everything's sort of stagnating, right? And then that chair that you're sitting in, we got what we consider the best ergonomic chair for people to at least, because I thought, should I give my guests a MoveMan? I thought, wrong. Well, the problem is if they're not used to that, it could be really uncomfortable. So instead of engaging with the conversation, they can just be thinking about how they're sitting and they know there's cameras here. Do you know what I mean? How would you think about that?
I've, with someone at the moment, I had someone come and see me, it's about your height, Stuart, his name is. And he had a furniture business, like auditorium kind of lecture chairs. And I'd seen his sister originally. She was like this yogi living off-grid in Portugal, came with a back condition. Very quickly, one session out the door, done. I need to send you my brother. Brother comes, Stuart. And he just said, do you think there's a chair in this stuff, Tony? Because I took him through simple ground resting positions that are in the book. They're just a simple series of ground sitting, from kneeling to sitting cross-legged to shin boxing. And each one of those, a prerequisite almost of how we stand, let's call it. They're almost like the motor skill milestones of what it is we do as children before we stand up. So we parked that conversation, and it must have been 2 years went by. I said, I have the idea. He's like, what? I said, I know the chair. So I have it. So we went through this whole design. So we're at the point we're ready to launch that very soon. And that then is a platform that's at normal seat height, and you can perform 6 different rest positions that you could normally perform on the ground. And you're 100% right. It's about MoveMan. It's like this understanding that, well, there should be certain signals to move anyway. If we've been in a position for too long, yes, we're stagnating. What does that mean if we think of flow states? What does stagnation have to do with a flow state? I'm stagnant versus flow, and then they're completely different ends of the spectrum, right? So it's enabling, I guess, that movement to be really fluid, which then ticks the box of earlier conversation about within an environment of work. What do we want to be on our game? Don't we want to be super sharp? And I think with this sitting conversation, it's individual specific again, isn't it? There's a template there of what we've normalized. So what we've tried to do with this particular chair is you can sit on it like an everyday chair, but equally you can be in certain positions which, if you don't have the mobility, it can be adjusted, and then over time you can start to gain the range. One of them being the squat, that has a central sitting pillar and the base goes up and down, so you'll start to gain more and more range in the ankle and the hips over time. But yet you can always be at desk level. So it then brings that ground sitting conversation into every office environment,
Yeah.
And then where do we go from there? Then we have standing desks. I think, it can be just as detrimental to stand with poor posture as it is to sit with poor posture. So the standing desk isn't always the answer. If you look at, my dad's an engineer, precision tool maker, and the most shocking posture from standing all day, working over screens and working over and working with materials that he has to for his trade. If you're still working over a desk and you're still stooped, where does that lead us? So it's just understanding there's certain postures or shapes that we should be adopting which help as prerequisites to standing. And the other conversation is around muscles need to learn how to switch on and off. So it's not great to be in one rest position for too long.
Whatever that is. So it's choosing a different shape. And normally, as I say, in ground rest position, you get a signal. It'll be a signal, this is a little bit uncomfortable now, let's move. And you shape shift. In a normal chair or on a sofa, we don't necessarily get that. Yeah.
And we start to stagnate, as you say. So that means that there is no muscles on, muscles off. It's either on, incredibly on to try and stabilize something, or it's just off. And both states over time can lead to atrophy. If a muscle's on for too long, on, it will atrophy over time. Swiss balls were like an example of that, where people are just sitting on a Swiss ball for a period of time. You'd be so on to try and stabilize that you're not giving yourself the rest opportunity within that. So it's with your move, man, it's the cue's there, it's moving.
Yeah, I'm moving constantly.
And then you find that you're then within that system, the muscles are on and muscles off. That's
yeah, and it's been amazing actually using this for the podcast, because I know I can't move too much because I won't be in the camera shot, I won't be on mic. So this will stay relatively, my mouth, my face will stay relatively close to this mic that's not moving. But I know my hips, my back, everything else moves a lot of the time, yet I'm still able to have a podcast conversation with the chair. And I guess I've found a solution that works for me in this particular aspect of my work. And I guess, a key sort of message I get from all of your work and in the new book is that we don't all have to go and, sell our house and live in a forest. Actually, there's lots of little things that we can do and bring into our normal lives, whatever that is, just to start optimizing a bit. And, you mentioned ground living a few times. Can you explain what ground living means for people, particularly in the context that the Hadza tribe are actually, they're also sitting a long time, right? But they're not sitting like us.
Yeah, so the studies around the Hadza are really quite fascinating. I mean, all the studies around the Hadza are fascinating, aren't they? Microbiome. Anyway.
Just remind us who the Hadza
are. They're a nomadic tribe that have been living the same lifestyle really for what would be tens of thousands of years. So there isn't anything that's changed within that environment. So if you wanted a good template of how things look, that's the place to go, really. And I think with the studies around sitting, the Hadza are sitting for 10 to 10.5 hours a day. So they're just as sedentary as we are in that respect. They're just not sitting in chairs. So they're interacting with their environment, the ground. So there's grounding within that. We understand now grounding, the charging of one from the mother of all batteries, right? Mother Earth. There's also the microbiome, so they're having an interaction with the biodiversity of their land, right, being part of that. And as the squat is a major rest position out of that 10.5 hours, they're also experiencing the same weight through the soles of their feet as if they're standing. So that means there's a metabolic chemical cost for that. That's an endurance event in itself. Just to be able to squat for large periods of time with the same weight, with all your segments upon that base of support being the foot. So if you're barefoot within that conversation, that's the 33 joints, 26 bones, 100 muscle tendon ligaments, and those 200 receptors feeding and nourishing that framework, but also the superstructure above it, understanding how to be organized perfectly above the base of support, so that when we stand up, everything is organized to support this huge weight being the human head above it, which makes them incredibly efficient.
Yeah.
So if we think of me for an endurance event, let's say, and I'm asked, well, how is it can you run for like 12 hours a day? Well, I spend 12 plus hours experiencing the weight in the soles of my feet, be it through standing or squatting. There's other rest positions in there, but the majority of it is.
So you're not. So basically, what you're saying is the mainstay of your life is not spent sitting in a chair.
Yeah.
You're in either the squat, other ground resting positions, walking or running. So therefore, even when you're resting, your movements and patterns are feeding the same kind of awareness in your body and the same patterns as when you actually get up and actually move.
Yeah.
Whereas for most of us, we're sitting in compromised postures. We are sitting in fixed, rigid chairs, which allow no movement. And therefore, when we try and go for a walk or a run, we feel our knee, we feel our hip. Do you know what I mean? Is that the point you're trying to make?
Yeah, so there's certain areas of the body that are designed for locomotion, or let's call it even mobility, and certain areas that are designed for stability. And so if you think about the foot, it's a huge supportive structure, incredibly strong as a foundation. It has moldable characteristics as well, like you can grip with your foot and you can balance with your foot around different objects, but in the linear kind of aspect of our world, it really only expects that flat plane. But you can climb with it, you can balance in trees with it. But if the foot's incredibly strong as a foundation, the ankle joint can be mobile, the knee can then be stable, the hip can then be mobile, the pelvis and core can be stable, and the thoracic spine can be mobile, and the neck can be stable. So there's like this joint by joint approach. But what it can also be is a culprits and victims model. So if the foot, for instance, has been shaped like a shoe shape, pointed, no longer wide in its toe box area, the great toe, which is like 4 times denser and thicker than all the other toes. It's a huge lever, foundation, anchor, and pivoting tool. If that's been compromised, then that becomes the culprit, and the ankle can become the victim. The ankle then becomes a culprit for the knee, and the knee becomes a victim. And we can go up that chain like that. So sitting, where does sitting lie in? If that's the shoe and what that does to the foot, well, what does the chair do if I'm compromised and sitting in that rigid form? Well, again, we get stagnation and pooling in the hips, and the hips should be, well, they're incredibly strong and stable, but they're also incredibly mobile, right? They're a ball and socket. And in running, they have to understand extension. And when we're sitting for long periods of time, where are they experiencing lots of flexion and they're compromised and stagnant in that position? Then what tends to happen is, because we're in these incredible beings for efficiency, we're always trying to find ways of burning less fuel in terms of survival, let's say. And this is where that conversation around there's a chemical metabolic cost for squatting or experiencing your weight on your feet the whole day. Therefore, you get stronger at that. Whereas in a chair, we can get even more efficient, even more efficient, even more efficient. We start to collapse then in that very framework in the mid-back that should be able to be extended and open to support the head above it. So then what happens is the head starts to drift forward of the base of support. The further forward my head is when I'm walking, it's like the case of Yehudi discussing earlier. When the head positions forward, we have to stride more. So the foot has to be further out in front of us. Otherwise, we would fall over. So it creates a longer lever, which the longer levers are more vulnerable. But it also then means that I spend more time on the ground, which means I'm less efficient, which means I'm using more muscle action to support the fact I'm on the ground for longer. So there's many factors in it. So sitting in a chair for long periods of time, yes, will compromise the way I stand, the way I walk, the way I run. Taking time out of that, again, there's unavoidable sitting scenarios, right? What are the environments I can take control of that and responsibility for? Well, the home, even if it means, we discussed this on the last podcast, it's like, it might mean Netflix. Okay, let's see if I can do a number of rest positions while Netflix binging. I'll do some shin box sits.
Or just sit on the floor, I guess.
Exactly, just get on the floor and just try.
Because you'll naturally move, won't you? Because
and again, you'll get cues to move.
Yeah.
So you would just start, and then there might be points where it's this is challenging. Of course it is, because you have to go, it's mobility. You have to go through the stage to begin with where, yes, it might be awkward. Play with the edges of discomfort though. Don't get out of there immediately. Just play with the edges, but also use supports. You can use a cushion underneath your butt for certain rest positions. You can put a little support behind your heel. You can use something to hold when you're squatting. And then over time, what happens is your mobility and strength will improve. But ultimately that will overlap and overlay into your everyday practices,
I guess the kind of overarching point for me there as I hear that is comfort versus discomfort, and how, we can compare a modern hunter-gatherer tribe to a modern industrial human living indoor in artificial lights. And one of the key differences is that the way we live, or what is normal in Western society now, is everything is engineered for comfort, right? There is no need anymore to become uncomfortable, whether that be in movement. You get these ergonomic chairs and, these things that you can slump in and you can't feel anything anymore. You don't have to have uncomfortable emotions because you can go to whatever your drug of choice is, whether it's the smartphone or, whatever. You can straight away
Pacify it.
So you don't need uncomfortable movement. You don't need uncomfortable emotions. You don't need an emotion like even hunger anymore. Hunger is something that very few people actually know what feeling hungry, real hunger is anymore, because for many people, clearly not everyone, there's no need. You can just distract it away or quickly snack or get a quick sugar hit or whatever. And it's very hard, isn't it? Because, you spoke about the ice cold immersion before. But it's this idea that many of us don't need to engage in any part of our life with discomfort, yet there are so many benefits when we do.
Yeah, it's discomfort and convenience, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's like choosing a way of living that in our modern sense would be considered quite inconvenient, Like the stairs are inconvenient. My parents are looking to choose a new house. They're moving. And so they were discussing bungalows. And my mum said, no, I'm not choosing a bungalow, because if you move into a bungalow, you'll get, she called it bungalow legs. And I said, what do you mean? She said, well, if you stop using the stairs, then the stairs become incredibly difficult. So you develop bungalow legs. And
Smart mum.
That was smart mum, right?
Yeah.
In that moment, I was like, oh, wow, okay, she's speaking the same language. This is the convenience and inconvenience, right? So think of, let's look at what food would have looked like, right? In terms of, let's call it pushing and pulling patterns, right?
Okay.
So let's go way back. Let's look at the foraging and the hunting experience. Maybe pulling a bow, throwing a spear, right? Pushing something, pushing carcass, pushing whatever it is. Right now, vegetation, right? Okay, foraging, what that meant over a landscape, right? Pulling things, pushing things, climbing. And then we go way to where we are now. You can literally just pull your screen down and push a button. That's where we're at. So there's this
still pulling, pushing.
It's still pulling, pushing, but we're still hunting in a way. We still get this set with huge amounts of dopamine involved with both practices, right? But it's just, again, it's understanding that, well, if I stop walking to the shops, perhaps, then the shops are going to seem further away. If I stop climbing the stairs are going to feel more steep. You become divorced from it, right? And I think the key is in Yehudi's case, and in many cases, is imagine a world where we don't become divorced from those practices, Can you imagine a world where we haven't become divorced from that 60% foot strength and 40% balance? We haven't been divorced from this huge capacity to move well or be well, right? And again, I think there is this huge amounts of convenience which drive more want. And I think if we can understand, well, what are the fundamental needs, even within this environment where it's incredibly convenient, then imagine how it would look, because actually we live in an amazing time, right? We just need to learn how to balance our needs within it. And then we've made an advancement, because at the moment it doesn't really look like an advancement when you look at most of the stats around health.
And even why something like running, something that is considered to be a natural human movement, the way a lot of people end up running now is resulting in a lot of injuries. I'm not saying the running is causing the injuries. It's that compromised posture. It's that compromised system that we now have compared to what is, biologically normal, biologically optimal. But then let's take something like a squat, Tony. Yeah. So you mentioned Yehudi now squats on the tube. I squatted yesterday for a bit, but I couldn't really do more than sort of 10 minutes, and then I had to stop for a few minutes and move and then get back in it. But again, that's just maybe a bit of natural discomfort. Maybe that's good. I instead of being in a squat for an hour, I would move my posture. Yeah. Many people might go, okay, all right, I hear you, Tony, I hear you, Rongan. I'm going to start squatting. and they're going to really struggle. They're going to struggle. It's going to be painful.
Yep.
They're going to maybe get their heels down, but they're going to arch their back's going to be totally rounded over in order to do that. So is there a point at which, like, our movement is so compromised because of the chairs we've been shoved into when we were at school for hours on end, because of these cushioned shoes that we've been wearing since we were kids, right? You've got all these positions in the book, and some of them are going to be easier for people than others. Squatting for many people is quite hard, though, isn't it? I mean, what would you, should the goal be, right? Should the goal be, I must be able to get to a squat within the next year? Because for many people, that's off-putting because they feel like they can't get there and maybe they'll never get there. Or is there some sort of halfway house?
Well, I just want to be able to pull a screen down and push a button and get a squat, because that's where we're at now. So we want things very quickly, right? And the squat will come, but it takes time and it takes practice. Maybe a few more pulls down and presses of the button of the screen, right? It just takes a longer practice. But there's stuff that you can do around the squat to assist it, you know. You can put heel supports in, like wedges.
I've got, in the kitchen, I've got this like weight bar.
Yeah.
Because I can squat all the way down, but my upper back will be arched.
Yeah.
And I don't particularly want to be in that position, so I will. I'll often just sit in the house in a squat, but on a little exercise bar. So I've just got a slight heel elevation, and I can keep a nice straight.
Yeah. So what does that tell us? Is it the posture that's affected, or is it ankle function? So it's ankle function affecting the rest of the frameworks. Then we can suddenly understand, well, why is it important to then have strong foundations and mobile ankles? Well, even that has an effect on the superstructure above it, the biostructure. So more often than not, it's ankle function it comes down to. So I would say use a support behind the heel so that you can rest in the squat. Ultimately, the squat is it's a rest position. We turned it into physiological exercise, right? Doing reps and getting DOMs and filling your quads and your glutes for days on end. But the reality is it's a position of birth, pooping, eating, and resting, right? So it's right. I would work with heel supports, and then with those heel supports over time, they can get lower and lower and lower. So with Yehudi, for instance, Yehudi had to have a heel support. It was like a wedge. You can now buy cork wedges that are like a slope, so you could start at the thicker end, and then over time you get to the thin slope of that wedge. And then you set a timer, perhaps.
And what if someone heard the first podcast we did, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago, right? And they've been trying on and off.
Yeah.
And they're going to tell you, listen, I've been doing it for 2-3 years. I'm way better than I was, but I still can't go all the way down. Maybe they've not practiced as much, or maybe they spend 8 hours in an office chair and they practice in the evening. So, one's working for them, one's working against them. Is it necessary, optimal? Should that be the goal? Or is the goal really to say, listen, even small improvements from here will actually already start to make a difference for you?
100%. It's small changes every day, incremental changes, right? And it's stuff that we might not even pick up on is even happening, but it will be happening elsewhere.
Yeah.
Like just by bringing the heel support in, already you're noticing the posture can be better.
Yeah.
So what have we increased there? Well, the posture's better. So it's a trade then, isn't it? Well, I might not have the ankle function. What about if I've had my ankle fused? Well, you're not going to get to a flat-footed squats, and then use a heel support, use something behind the heel that would enable the ankle to behave how it needs to behave so it can get to a point where it's rested. I think ultimately get to the point where the squat can be resting for you. So that means put whatever needs to be behind the heel to get to the point where the squat is restful. And then the more restful the squat can feel, the more range you're going to develop over time anyway. If it's uncomfortable, what are we creating more there? We're going to get more tension. We're going to get more stress within it. We're then going to feed this sympathetic, parasympathetic divide, right? Just get stronger. Yeah. So it's, well, what are other things we can do? Well, we can be breathing to offer more relaxation within it. We can think like even within a meditation position, you're looking to relax certain parts, aren't we? We're looking to have that checklist of, can I be relaxed in the hips, the chest? Try and find the same thing within the squat itself. But also there's kneeling positions within the book, which are prerequisites of squatting. So there's a single leg kneeling position in there, which is the equivalent of doing a single legged squat. And what you can do then is play around with range within that one leg support underneath you, the range within the ankle, and ultimately open up more dorsiflexion.
What's dorsiflexion for people?
Plantiflexion. Imagine you're standing now and you point your toes down into the ground. Think about you're planting your toes. That's plantiflexion. And dorsiflexion is you're looking to, say, pull the bridge of your foot and your big toe up towards your shin. And it's important for dorsiflexion when it comes to practices like walking and running, because there's certain rocking actions in the ankle that need to be honoured to be able to keep your feet within a certain range underneath you. And also to help then with knee stability and hip function as well above it. So I would say work between the kneeling positions that are prerequisites of the squat, put a support behind the heel, and also just play with those edges of discomfort and remember the convenience versus inconvenience.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we might think, well, I've been doing this for 2 years, but it's maybe time to maybe up the practice within the day of how much we're doing.
Yeah.
And maybe just put more into it. And that could be movement based, it could be sleep, it could be digestion, whatever it is, just become very skilled at that thing for that time, because it could be the squat would then improve the way I run. The squat would improve the way I stand. If it was digestion, work on down regulation, because we talk about food being thy medicine, but really digestion and absorption is the ability to allow food to be its medicine, so it's...
You mentioned the squat is a rest position for many cultures.
Yeah.
Every other summer we'd go to India as kids, and I remember in my family's house, if there was helpers there, literally be sat in a squat for hours, like cutting vegetables and peeling things, and just totally,
normalized.
They won't even be thinking, how am I squatting? I am now on a squat. Am I static? No, it's just because obviously that's the natural movement. They're barefoot a lot of the time. They haven't got the compromised movement in the first place. In one of my auntie's houses, actually, I remember there was a kid who got there and there was no Western toilet. Like, if you wanted to go to the toilet, you had to squat.
Yeah, it's not like you had a Western toilet with a squatty potty.
Yeah, it was just, and so of course, if you grow up in that environment, not being able to squat means you can't go to the toilet. So of course, everyone can squat, which is really fascinating, because many people just will not have had that experience and not know that is the norm for millions, billions of people around the world, right?
For thousands upon thousands of years, right?
Yeah, so that is and you mentioned it's a pooping position. Well, how common is constipation? And there's so many causes for that. Of course, the poor diet, the chronic stress state, the subregulation, which that's not the state your body wants to be in when sort of letting go of stuff that it no longer wants, right? But there's also posture. Have you seen with some of your clients, because we know anatomically, physiologically, what does a squat do for your ability to, have a number two? It's pretty significant, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I love all the stuff on Squatty Potty. It brings your feet up as if you're squatting, but you can still have your butt on the toilet, right? But it just brings your knees up. So it just helps open up what would be, as you say, it just makes pooping more comfortable and aligned with how nature intended it to be. So that there's less strain, right? I think that's the understanding of it again, that I think with constipation, hemorrhoids, all of those issues can be aligned with that too.
Yeah. You have got this new book out, which I think people are going to find incredibly helpful. I know what it takes to write a book.
Yeah.
It's a lot of time. It's a lot of time not moving when actually writing, right?
Yeah.
So for most people, that looks like sitting at a table, hunched over a laptop, typing away. What did it look like for you?
There were still moments like that because I was traveling as well. So there was still moments like that. But the majority of it was spent on the ground. So I have a ground sitting desk. I have ground sitting tables at home. So they're low tables. So I would have spent that kneeling, squatting, shin boxing, standing though as well.
And presumably in that time, you're sort of, maybe you're lost in thought in your head, trying to articulate an idea. But at some point, as fit and as mobile as you are, I'm guessing that ground resting position would have become uncomfortable. So you would have naturally...
And that's what I want, really. I'd want that. Otherwise, again, it gets to that point where you're stagnating. You're in that same position and you want to allow muscles to be on, off, on, off, on, off. So there is a nurturing that comes with that. You have to be in tune with it and pick up on the signals. Some of those positions I can be in for 20 minutes, like kneeling, I could be longer, but it will get to the point where my feet will be numb. It's like, I can't feel my feet now. Okay, time to move then.
Yeah.
So you get just subtle cues,
Yeah.
But there's still unavoidable sitting scenarios within that. And then what I do is I then offset it. So I say, okay, I've been sitting for this period of time. Is it great for me to just walk now immediately afterwards? No, let's try and reset at least the locomotive joint actions. So I'll hold the desk, squat, allow my heels to come up so I don't have to worry about that ankle position, or trying to have a flat-footed squat. I'm more concerned with posture. So I keep my chest up, look at the horizon, drop, bounce, stand, walk, done.
Cold immersion is something that is all the rage these days, right? People see it, they hear Wim Hof doing it. He's certainly popularized it for many people. I know people have been doing it for years, but obviously he's brought it to the masses massively. Let's just go into cold immersion, because I know we've been through a few practices so far, right? You're sort of making the case that many of us are upregulated for the majority of the time, whereas it's more natural to be down-regulated in that kind of rest and relax state, and many of us are not. So therefore, what are some of these practices we can do to help down-regulate us? So you mentioned, breathing every hour, the 4-6 breath.
Nature immersion.
And then even this sort of movement kind of down regulation, I guess you could argue what you sort of like ground resting positions and squatting. Where does cold immersion fit into this kind of framework?
As I explained a little earlier, is that if you think about the cold being a stressor, let's say, and so I will breathe before going in to change my perception of the cold to start with, so I can become more down-regulated before I go in. So
I'm just going to pause you there, because that was interesting. Change your perception of the cold, right? So the cold water is still going to be cold, but you're doing something that's going to change your experience of the cold, right? Yeah. That's powerful.
Yeah, so so Lola and Millie I take through this practice.
How old are they?
So they're now, Lola's about to turn 13, Millie about to turn 11. We were staying at our friend's estate. They have a big lake, all through the winter, thick ice, smashing through the ice to get in. Lola and Millie there as well, in their swimsuits, teaching them breath. Shot an amazing video with them, just to say, this could be for Lola and Millie. They're unschooled, but let's say if it was school, for instance, and they're about to walk into an exam, the icy lake is the exam, right? So what am I going to teach Lola and Millie? Right, we're going to go through breathing now. So the cold represents whatever the stressor is. Anything, could be anything. Could be the phone call, the meeting, could be the school exam, going back to school for the first day for some, right? Here's a breathing technique to change your perception of that environment. And then we continue the breath when we're in, and we work on down regulation with breath whilst we're in the water to remain calm in the stressor. So it's like, here's the stressor, let's do this before entering. And here's the stress, let's do this whilst in the stress, what we perceive as the stress. So it changes our perception of that. But it also does something else in terms of, I'm a bit of an adventurer, endurance athlete. So there's the recovery aspect of it, but there's also changing my mind's perception of cold, So it's not so extreme. And I think that level of convenience and inconvenience, we've normalized room temperature. So anything outside of room temperature seems like an extreme.
Yeah.
Once you start to then go into the cold or into ice baths, doesn't have to be an ice bath, it could be a cold shower or a cold bath, right? You change your mind's perception. You'll change your template of that.
Yeah, it's like the cold is the stress, and you're practicing with a particular stress that I guess you can control in some ways, depending on where you live and what you have access to. And by practicing that, you're practicing for life.
Yeah, because again, you can change your perception of a stressor, right? And then it gets to the point where the cold that's stressful, right? Because you're doing it for so long. But I think it's never the same. Like even cold tub one day will never be the same as the next day, right? So don't even like to put pressure on of timing. Just look for the present best in that moment.
Yeah.
How can I be doing my best within that moment? And
yeah, that's so powerful, isn't it? This idea that it's never the same twice. So even if it was a temperature-controlled ice bath and it was whatever temperature you've set it at, your perception of that is going to be different.
Yeah.
Depending on how you slept, I guess, your stress levels, how you're feeling, what you've got going on that day.
And that's individual specific, right? It could be two people queuing up to go in the same ice bath. They're both having a completely different perception of what's going on in that moment in time anyway, right? Of that reality, right?
So when it's not the winter and when someone doesn't have access to a lake, what might this look like for them? Is it a cold shower, cold bath once a week, every day?
Cold shower, it can be a cold bath. It can be starting off with warm in the shower, switching to cold at the end to finish the shower. And for some, that's where it has to start.
Well, some people will say, and they've said it before when we've covered it on the show, I can't do cold showers. They're not for me. I don't tolerate the cold, which I find quite interesting in and of itself.
Yehudi's 79-year-old terrified of the cold.
So when you started with it, he was terrified.
I mean, they had trauma around cold to the point he wouldn't go near any cold. And then since then, that's his experience. But for him, this is different. I think with doing an ice bath and going into cold showers and building, it sometimes takes that level of experience almost like a rite of passage. Mm-hmm. Because then it takes us outside of our everyday experiences, right? And our everyday behaviors and sometimes social templates. And sometimes when we do step outside of that, we can then bring around change, right? So for Yehudi, it was stepping outside everything that he'd known to go to a new experience, being a rite of passage, being an ice bath. Mm-hmm. And then that completely changed his perception of his world, even to the point now he's, at the ponds or the River Lee 5 times a week, right? And making the effort to get there in the morning, first thing, gets there, does it, feels empowered for it. He messaged me one of those days just to say, thank you, Tony, I finally found peace. Imagine, that's really quite deep. It's quite profound, isn't it? So, yeah, I get it. If, I can't do cold, I can't do this. It's that there's a language there and it's an internal dialogue, and we can change that, and we can change that through breathing. So again, I would start with breath first. Start with the breath, try and tune into what that language and what that is, and just enable that, release that first, right? At least. Yeah. Work through the breath. Don't just jump in the cold shower or the cold bath. Yeah. Because what you're going to do is just create an emotional reaction to it, which is only going to feed then even more fear of the cold or the experience. So it's understanding there's a skill to it, really, and the breath enables us to really access that.
So okay, just to be super practical, someone's standing in their warm shower that they're comfortable with, totally relaxed, chilling, singing away, whatever they might be doing, right? And they're thinking, okay, in a few minutes, I'm going to turn it to cold for whatever, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, whatever. What might they do specifically to prepare themselves for that cold whilst they're in the hot shower? Is that how it would work?
I'd avoid like the really upregulation of the breath, because you're standing up in a shower.
So that Wim Hof type hyperventilation, you wouldn't want to do that.
You could get lightheaded, you could fall out of the bath, right? Out of the shower. So I would work with, again, just long inhales up through the nose, exhale, longer on the exhale, down-regulate. Don't up-regulate, actually, just down-regulate.
So 4-6?
4-6, if 4-6 works. Or you don't have to obsess over counting, it could just be an inhale and an exhale. Try and go, you could even try, I call it We Will Rock You breath, where you do like a, we will, yeah. So, you can practice that and do that whilst you're in your preferred water temperature, right? And then adjust the water at the temperature as you go. You don't have to go straight to cold. It can be just bit by bit by bit, but keep working through the breath as you're going. So you're putting your focus and your attention on your breath, not on the cold. Rather than how we started the conversation was, in 2 or 3 minutes, I'm going to go in the cold. That just feeds the beast, right? It's like, okay, I'm not going to go in and see the lion right now. I'm going to breathe. So let's focus, put all the attention on the breath. Keep going through the breath, 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out, or long inhale, long exhale, longer on the exhales, and then incrementally work on the temperature until you get it where you are. Another great practice is the bath, because you can sit by the bath, you can breathe by the side of the bath. You can use the handles on the bath at the side. You can lower yourself in. You can get to your belly button. Exhale every time you enter into that, or put more of your body parts into the water. Exhale. Do it on the exhale. because again, with the exhale, we get, if you put your finger on your pulse, you get a pick up of the breath on the inhale and you get a lowering of heart rate, blood pressure on the exhale. Work with the exhale and put all your attention into the exhale as you get in. So as you start to immerse more in the water, just breathe out, and focus on the exhale. And that then is an overlap again into other experiences of stress. Exhale, The worst thing you can do is tell someone to, if they're having a really stressful, anxious moment, is to breathe, because chances are they're already... So if you get them to breathe out first, you then give them a space to breathe in again.
Yeah. One of my favorite chapters in the book is the one on sleep. And clearly when you are upregulated the entire time, sleep is, I guess, the ultimate down regulation. It's going to be very, very hard to sleep. And we know that many people struggle to sleep. So I guess a lot of the practices we've already mentioned are going to help people with sleep. One of the things I really liked in the book was you talking about how we may not all need 8 hours of sleep and how that may not be biologically normal. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, it's a fantastic subject, isn't it? The sleep, because I went on a path of, I've got to get 8 hours and it's got to be this. And, you can get so upregulated and stressed trying to get 8 hours. And, when we're not achieving it, we end up more stressed, right? And I think I'm a father to 4, right? And so it was very important that I could remove myself from the 8-hour language, really. And so where can we look? And again, we look to indigenous tribes to look at what's a natural template of sleep, removed from our everyday environment of what we have today. And it's Professor Siegel, University of California, looks at 3 independent tribes, 3 separate geographic locations, and they look over a period of time. And they observe that no one in those tribes are getting 8 hours. It's between 5.7 and 7.1 hours sleep. And when they pull away and they look at the Hadza, and it's over 33 members of that tribe over a 220-hour cycle period of time, they're only ever asleep together like 18 minutes.
All of them at the same time?
All of them, yeah. So they're basically sleep-waking all the way through. And it helps you maybe understand the sleep-wake cycle, because if we were in hostile environments and we were all asleep for 8 hours, would we be here, right? It's like... so it's looking at the sleep-wake, but what's different, and we touched on this at the beginning, and the difference is the air quality, the air temperature, the information they're receiving. So the lighting is different, right? They don't have the ability to switch, to create sunrise at sunset by switching a light on. There isn't this huge cascade through their hormones by playing around with lighting and temperature. So it's really, for me, it became very much about the environment. It's creating a sleep habitat that would then drive the habit, right, of sleep. So not even just sleep hygiene, just understanding, well, if I change the environment of which I sleep and I look at the air quality and I look at the lighting and I look at the temperature, then surely I'll get more of a natural outcome of how my sleep would be. And that's where that study just blew my mind, because it was the ultimate template of that. It's like saying, okay, we don't need 8 hours, but also there's other markers within that. And we look at like ghrelin and leptin, don't we, around digestion. Yeah. And then we see that melatonin is actually a driver of that as well. So it's like, well, if lighting comes in and it suppresses melatonin, I don't have some of these digestive kind of influences in place, right?
Yeah. I love that focus on the environment. Instead of focusing too much on the sleep and what's going on with the sleep, it's like, let's focus on, light, temperature, and air quality.
Yeah,
right?
and information, right? What we're absorbing.
So that's kind of 3-4 quite tangible things.
Yeah.
Let's just go through those, because so many people struggle with sleep. So many people beat themselves up that they're not getting 8 hours. Many people get 8 hours and are still knackered afterwards, which is super fascinating in and of itself, I think. But if we just
quite common, right?
Very common. And, the sleep quality versus quantity can come in. Or I guess also, I sometimes think, and I know you share a similar perspective, that if we're chronically upregulated and chronically stressed, well, there's more to recover from. That we need to sleep, we need to sleep, rest, down-regulate, do something to recover from that. But if your life is inherently not that stressful. You actually probably don't need as much sleep or rest because there's not as much to recover from, which again is sort of flipping things on their head a little bit around the conversation with sleep, I think.
Yeah, I think also then part of that understanding, well, the sleep environment can also be adding to the stress. So it's changing the sleep environment will improve the sleep habit, but also the environment itself could be leading to the stressor. So if you're in 8 hours of your experience because you've been trying to achieve 8 hours sleep, and you're inhaling the same air that you've basically, windows are closed, you've got central heating on, let's say, what are we inhaling for those 8 hours, right? In and out the same air, right? We've been kind of maybe hypervisual kind of stuff going on with our screen, so we're upregulated from our screen, so we have fight and flight responses kicking in. We haven't managed to downregulate before sleep. Don't even understand there is downregulation before sleep, or that would be appropriate for rest and digest, you know. And then thinking about the quality of that information I'm receiving, and then we know that studies suggest that there's a huge influence of dopamine by typing, swiping, and getting likes on your screen. Dopamine isn't conducive with sleep either.
No.
And then there's the light that's pouring into our eyeballs again, which will kind of suppress melatonin, right? So then it can take another hour to 3 hours to get that melatonin anywhere near where it should be to perform its task, which isn't just sleep. I mean, it's that's another podcast in itself.
Yeah.
Just understanding melatonin, it's phenomenal.
It really is, and you write about a study there about light in the book, which is really pretty stark for people, you know. And I think the researcher at that study, like many researchers, feel that actually some people think that the most important factor for obesity is light exposure at night.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Light exposure.
Yeah. So melatonin will suppress certain, it's the regulatory systems of your digestion are all affected by melatonin. So if you remove melatonin from the subject, we're still going to be hungry. So we're still going to start looking for food, right? We haven't had that suppressing kind of hormone coming in.
So normally without that light in the evening, in a more natural environment, without the sunlight, without the natural light, without the blue light from our screens, melatonin will start to go up. And you're saying that actually, if we don't have melatonin, then a lot of the cues to our body are the same as they were in the day.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's daytime hormones that are in place. Again, you need things like the moment the light comes up, the sun comes up, and we're out there and we're moving around underneath that light. We have serotonin. Serotonin helps synthesize melatonin for the evening, right? So that's one cycle. Then when we get to and then once melatonin starts to pick up in the evening, cortisol becomes at its lowest, right? And melatonin should be at its peak. And it starts to be introduced from 6 p.m., 7 p.m., 8 p.m., 10 p.m. should be at its peak by 10 p.m. If you're, as in some of the clients that have come to see me at the beginning when we had a news at 10, it'd be like, well, yeah, I watch news at 10. I like to watch the news at the same time. So at 10 o'clock, how is their melatonin? How are you expecting your melatonin to be at its peak by 10 p.m., right?
The campfire in the evening would be storytelling, romance, humor. What part of the news at 10 is storytelling, romance, or humor?
And the spectrums of light are different. So firelight is it's amber tones, right? It creates biological darkness. Biological darkness is starlight, moonlight, firelight. And whereas we have the light bulb moment came in, and then that light bulb moment means that we can create bright experiences in the evening. With that bright experience in the evening, it doesn't give any count for what might happen hormonally, right? And what might happen throughout that system.
What do you do at home? Because I think many people who listen to the show now are aware that, you know, artificial light exposure in the evening is not that helpful. Yeah. Yet it is one of the hardest things to persuade, inspire, empower people to do, because these devices are so addictive and our entire lives are on them, right? So what does it look like for Tony Riddle in his house? Because we can say the science. I mean, one of the things I've done, because I sometimes get tempted, even though I know I've written books on this stuff, I have to put in some quite strict measures in place. One thing that's been really, I mean, a simple thing like not having your phone in your bedroom, keeping it downstairs. We live in a 2-story house, we leave it downstairs. That helps. I have these like low blue light bulbs now
Yeah.
in all the bedside lamps in the kids' room, in my room. So if we're reading at night, it's not a bright bulb that we might use in the day. It's a sort of amber tone, there's very little blue light in that. And I found it's made a huge difference. What does it look like for you in your house?
It's similar. I think the studies are suggesting that it's between, it depends on the study. There's one that suggests anything about 60 lux, but it's 60 lux to 600 lux, which is spectrums of light, of blue light that would be emitted from a light bulb, right? And that will then is enough to suppress melatonin, right? But again, it's directional. So whereas new lighting is very different, it's directly in that, directly in the eye. That then is through the suprachiasmatic nucleus, stops that melatonin production, right? So it's there's types of light that you can get. You can buy amber lighting, you can buy Bluetooth amber lighting, you can buy Wi-Fi amber lighting. And then what are you then emitting around your home at the same time? So it's then a trade-off between more electromagnetic chaos around your home versus blue light. We have started using like Himalayan salt lamps in the kids' rooms.
Yeah.
And
nice
then,
reddish
then you
tone.
can also change the bulbs within those, so you can play with the lux of light.
These are quite simple things,
and they're not
aren't they?
they're not that expensive, right? And you could also say candles, but again, you have to be really mindful with those. So I would go tea lights inside jars.
Yeah,
that's quite a nice light. And then again, it's firelight, it's amber light.
But obviously that can help, but still people might be on the smartphone in bed.
Yeah, and the other thing with a smartphone, you can wear stuff like amber glasses, but that's dealing with the light spectrum, but you're not dealing with the dopamine, right?
Yeah, the stimulation, the emotional stimulation from the news or the
Whereas
likes
you
or whatever.
You really want that kind of healthy dopamine in the morning when you wake up, kind of get out in the natural light with serotonin, have a little bit of move around, get that kind of the motivational molecule seeking hormone going in the morning, and have that as a healthy kind of balance throughout the day. It's just not conducive with sleep. So it's just being mindful of that. Then I guess being mindful of the information that you're receiving.
Yeah.
Can you put a cap on it? Can you say, right, okay, here's the time. This is my sleep time. This is what I take into the bedroom. Bedroom is for sleeping, for sex. It's not for working, typing, and swiping. Have that kind of language that you adopt.
Yeah.
You can also, why not switch Wi-Fi off in the evening at a certain time?
Yeah.
And kill it that way.
It's very powerful when you do that, or if you have a timer like we used to have, where it would just go off at a certain time.
Yeah. We had we're living in Somerset now. We had a massive power cut, and it wiped out Wi-Fi in our house. And I have like a mast on my studio, because whatever Wi-Fi we had anyway wasn't strong enough really for Zoom calls or anything in the house. But since then we didn't switch it back on again, so we kept that away from the house, and so we only have it in the studio. So if anyone wants to watch anything, we still have movie night with the kids. If they want to do any work on their iPad or want to research anything, we now have a completely different location to go and do it, which is in the studio. So it keeps it even out of the house.
That is really powerful. I mean, even beyond Wi-Fi and electromagnetic radiation, the brain is an associative organ. We associate certain behaviors in certain environments. And so this is why what you're saying about not bringing, your work emails into your beds. And this is why I think over the last couple of years, when a lot of people have been working from home and they're working in the same environment in which they're trying to switch off and relax, incredibly problematic for many people, because your brain is associating that environment with a certain task. And if you just want to chill now and switch off, it's like, wait a minute, something. So I think that's really, really great.
It's almost like creating, again, like I discussed ritualistic spaces for meditation or breath work or movement. It's the same within work. It's like, well, if you're working from home, you have to create an environment or at least a place which is the work experience,
It's even, we're sitting in this podcast studio, we haven't just stumbled into it being of this design, right? It's like, well, what do we want? What do I want out of this conversation, or the conversations I have? I want warmth, vulnerability, intimacy, authenticity. Okay, so what sort of environment do you need to create in order for that to come up? Well, some nature, nice tones. We've got a very thin desk here on purpose, so that actually
it's more intimate, right?
It's more intimate. This is, I guess, a much broader theme in your work, I think, for many years, including in the new book, is the environment influences us so much. You have gone to what many people would regard as an extreme by having no chairs in your house. Now, I happen to not think that's extreme, although my wife has certainly not agreed to that in our house, right? So that's just the way it is. But I try, my morning routine when I get up and when I'm doing my reading or meditation, I'm on the ground. I've been doing that for years. I don't want to sit in a chair at that point. It doesn't feel like I just don't want to do that. But I guess what you're saying, a big theme for me, which is why I think your work is helping so many people, is that it's just saying, look, just be a bit more intentional with how you're living. Just be a bit more aware. And here are a few small things you can do to your environment that will naturally mean you live better. Is that a fair reflection?
Absolutely. It's just, again, looking at needs, I guess, within that environment.
Yeah.
How can I get my needs met within everyday environments?
Yeah. I want to just, at the end of this conversation, Tony, move on to running.
Yeah.
You are a very accomplished endurance athlete. You've done all kinds of what many people would consider crazy and wonderful things. Running the length of the UK completely barefoot, the Three Peaks Challenge, running up these mountains and these rocky terrain barefoot. And I know you're not suggesting that everyone has to do that in order to live naturally. What I'm interested in is, in Be More Human, when I was reading about running, you described it as a spiritual experience for you. And I'm really fascinated by what you mean by that. A big sort of feature of this conversation today is about sensing more, being more, really, really sort of leaning into the experience that you're having within your life. When you say running's a spiritual experience for you, what do you mean by that? Do you run with a watch? Are you tracking minutes per mile? Share a little bit with us about what that looks like for you.
I'm training for a big event in September, which is I'll be running 100 Ks a day for 10 days. And
with shoes on? No shoes?
I'm wearing...
Not sure.
It's as close as you could possibly get to being barefoot.
Okay.
So it's I'm working alongside Vivo Barefoot at the moment with something like a prototype, and I'll be able to discuss a bit more on it at a future date, I guess. But it means that my feet can pretty much perform how feet should be performing, but just a little protection.
Okay.
And very bespoke in that sense. It's my feet rather than off the shelf shoes. And with that experience, I've been really working on, firstly, getting out in the environment. So it's along the Southwest Coastal Path. So parts of that terrain are just incredibly empowering anyway. We've talked about nature immersion, we've talked about breath work, we've talked about movement. So that trifecta alone has been met, Yeah. And how can you not feel amazing after that? So already it's a heightened experience for me. It's beyond kind of a physical experience of just mileage or what my heart rate might be. So am I wearing a Garmin? No. Do I track mileage? I tend to use Strava on my first run of a new segment just to map it so I have it, and then after that I ignore it.
Why do you not run? Because the norm these days is to run with a watch and track everything, right? I don't, but I'm interested as to why you don't.
Because I can make it more playful, and I'm not performing for whatever it needs to be, or also the ego doesn't need to be posting about what mileage I'm doing or what my timing is. I'll put one up from this is a new part of the journey, this is it, and I have that so I can map the range and the distance of it, so I know that, and I know where I've kind of come in, and I can play with that, so I can just refine the experience in amongst that time, and it can be more playful. So I don't need to keep looking at my Strava, my phone, or my Garmin, or whatever it is at that time. I can just be focused on breath and the path itself, and my practice is really about refining the technique of running.
Yeah.
So I'm always trying to improve and improve and improve and improve and refine things while I'm out there.
Yeah.
And I think it becomes a huge distraction from that if I'm looking at a device or looking at, how's my time comparing to this?
Yeah.
Whereas every step and every breath becomes part of that, the present best conversation earlier, rather than trying to achieve a personal best every leg I'm out there. Whereas when you're doing a big endurance event like that, I can't operate at that level.
No.
I have to it's whatever's presented in that moment. And that's part of that spiritual self as well. It's present best. It's being really present and tuned in to what I'm doing and what I'm expressing at that moment. And that's where running takes me. It's a real heightened states, kind of profound states when I'm in it,
Yeah. Now, I really appreciate you sharing that. The truth is, I'm eschewing tech more and more. I understand many people are really attached to tech, and everyone can have a different relationship to it. And some people can use devices and not let them, overly obsess them and actually drive their entire life. And I want to totally be respectful of that. I've just found when I'm moving, walking or running or a walk run or whatever it might be, I just find it so much more enjoyable when I don't have something on my wrist that I'm looking at.
Well, you're competing with in a way.
Yeah, and even if you think you're not, it's very hard to not. And then you don't take into account, as you say, every time you go into that cold plunge or the cold bath or the cold water, even if it's the same temperature, your experience of that's going to be different. And let's say you're running, 10-minute miles, for example, someone's used to seeing that pace, or they've just hit that and they're dead excited, or 9-minute miles or whatever. And then on another day, actually, they're already doing 11-minute miles. Often that's a tool to beat themselves up. Like they don't recognize
failure, right?
Yeah, and it starts that negative dialogue. Oh, why can't I do that? And they don't recognize. Well, you've been on the roads. You didn't take a lunch break today. You didn't sleep as much last night. Whatever. Yet you're trying to compare yourself to the external metric, and I do think for some people it's harmful.
Yeah, it stops us tuning into all the amazing skills that we have within. We have everything inside of us, right? To be simply awe-inspiring, I personally believe. And I think we have all the gear, but unfortunately, the more gear that's being developed over here, the less idea we have of our own potential. Mm-hmm. I'll use breathing really to understand where I'm at. So nasal breathing will be one. If I'm pushing too hard, I'll have to mouth breathe. Okay, I need to taper back again. Let's get back to nasal breathing. And the breath tells me so much more when I'm out there running.
Will you, whilst you're doing 100K, is your goal, with the understanding that at various times, depending on what's going on, you may have to change this, is your goal to be pretty much exclusively nasal breathing?
Yeah. Well, I train only nasal breathing. So, and there's, along this particular path, there's 4 Everests involved in it in terms of the ascent and descent of that along the path.
4 Everests?
4 Everests. So it's the Southwest Coastal Path is...
it's meant to be pretty brutal, that path, isn't it?
630 miles, or 1,000 Ks. And the record at the moment is 10 days, 12 hours. So I'm attempting that in September. And you're then looking at nasal breathing throughout that. So most of the legs I go out and do, even a 10 mile, you could come back and your ascent is like 2,360 feet on one particular segment. And then you're looking at doing 6 of those in that day.
Now, I understand nasal breathing when you are on flat terrain, when you've trained, you've practiced, you sort of, okay, cool, I've gone through that process. Now my body's comfortable with that and it keeps you in a aerobic sort of zone. I get all that. When you're now going on an uphill, like sounds like quite a steep uphill or a prolonged uphill.
Yeah.
Of course, many people are not trained to be able to do this. Your goal is still to maintain nasal breathing while you're doing that? Or do you then allow yourself a little bit, actually, if I have to open my mouth a little bit to get up here, that's okay, but then I'll return to it as soon as I can?
Again, there's been present best, but the majority of it now, I've just like you would train to run on a flat and nasal breathe, I'm now training to do ascents like that. But there are moments when I joked one day and, I said, it was a particularly hard day. And so I said, there was nasal breathing majority of the way, but I was also mouth breathing. And I think I might have been blowing out my ass at one stage, because it was just intense. But the majority of it is then back
Yeah.
to nasal breathing and
Yeah.
just trying to just maintain the form that I need, and the form being the technique as well, but also the technique within the breath. And, the studies are on vasodilation, bronchial dilation, but the vapor loss is also something quite profound, right? Understand there's 42% more vapor loss through mouth breathing.
Yes, you need more water.
So
You need to be
need
running
more,
with all
hydrate
these.
more, right?
You need all these energy drinks alongside you because you're losing it all through your mouth.
And again, it's just when you look at that study, it's a bit like going to barefoot at one stage. You go, why would I do that then? Okay, and if I got to basically go and run what is 100 Ks a day, I need to become incredibly efficient at doing that.
Yeah,
And for
I
me,
love it.
that's technique, it's refinement of technique, and nasal breathing comes into that just as much as running form itself,
We covered a lot on nasal breathing. First time we spoke, the squat, all kinds of things, which I hope people revisit that conversation. There's a lot of gold and wisdom in there. The book says, Tony, I think it's going to help a lot of people. You're really inspirational, Tony. I love what you're doing, how you do it.
Likewise, man. Thank you.
And it's, been a real pleasure to talk to you again on the podcast. To finish off, the podcast, as you know, is called Feel Better, Live More.
Yeah.
Your book's called Be More Human. When we become more human, of course, we're going to feel better and get more out of life. For people who are feeling inspired, they're kind of like, okay, Tony, I'm hearing you. I'd like to live a bit more in tune with my biological heritage and biological normality. You've given me quite a few ideas today, but I don't quite know where to start. How would you put it together for people at the end who feel inspired to take that next step?
Where to go? Firstly, pre-order the book. Out on the 26th of May. I think firstly, just compassion before you enter any of this work, right? Compassion for others, because if you're going to bring around change, it's going to challenge others. Compassion to yourself, because you're going to be challenged when taking on change. And patience, being patient with ourselves, being patient with others.
Yeah, love it.
Through a compassionate lens.
Yeah, fantastic advice that's helpful for anyone, no matter where they are on their journey. Good luck with the book.
Thanks, man.
And good luck with the run. If you enjoyed that conversation, I think you are really going to enjoy this one about simple things you can do each morning that will make a really big difference.
Everybody has to learn how to do this. Your whole life gets better. Learning to control your nervous system will change everything. The foundational practice that I truly believe every person should do every day is